What's going on, everybody? Kevin Cole here. A special, I guess you could say. Maybe you'll wait and see to determine exactly how special, but a special solo pod here, topical thing. I'm going to try to do this some more during the season, maybe even some more during the off season, where I'm going to talk about issues that are coming out, try to get out quickly, get ahead of the news, and quite honestly, what ends up happening is I do my research on these things. I have some takes that I fire out on Twitter, which are, it's not the greatest platform for talking through ideas and getting stuff out there. And then I move on to the next thing and never really get around to publishing something where the bar is a little bit higher for making sure that I know what I'm talking about, I guess, in some ways than it is on here when I'm talking through ideas and implications. And let's face it, it's just a pain in the ass to write some stuff down and to publish it there versus to get on here and yap for a while. So I'm going to start doing this some more in the future. We'll see if I paywall these things or not. I'm not quite sure. But you'll probably be hearing from me more often. I think I'm going to put this one out as a pod also, but it's also possible that I'll just do this stuff exclusively on YouTube and try to drive some more people over to the Unexpected Points YouTube page. All right. Done with the preamble here. The thing that happened today brought up something that I've been wanting to write about, think about, dissect for a while now. And that is the event is Deshaun Watson and the fact that his contract was restructured once again today. For those who may not be aware of exactly what happened. So Deshaun Watson, he signed this fully guaranteed deal with the Browns. $230 million, I believe, fully guaranteed. And since then, it started with a low cap number. Then there have been restructures, another restructure, and who knows, there might be future restructures in here. This specific restructure was taking the cap hit for 2024, and I'll bring up for those of you watching on YouTube or on X. I forgot I'm on X also. Don't give short shrift to X. So for the contract, we're looking at an old version of Watson's contract here. Let me pump it up a little bit here so we can actually see it for people. That for 2024, so it's a $46 million base salary. So that goes straight up on the cap. We have the prorated signing bonus. So prorated different bonuses here. As you can see, all 46 million is guaranteed. And then we have the cap number. So the cap number for the next 3 remaining years on the contract, pre-restructure here for Deshaun Watson, was $63,774,678. At least for this year. I'm not sure where that 678 came from because it's a little bit different on some of the other ones. But long story short, roughly $64 million a year in remaining in each of the 3 years on the contract. And then there was a void year for $9 million in relation to a previous restructure, I believe. They added the void year on there, and then they did the restructure. So what they did for this restructure was basically running back what they had done for the last restructure. So they convert 44 million and change of the base salary of the $46 million base salary. They convert all but I think 1.2 million, something like that, into a bonus. That bonus is now prorated over the life of the contract. That cap hit is dropped by 40 something million dollars. And then the cap hits in the future years rise by the prorated bonus. Now, what they're able to do on this, and when you see the contract structure for what is currently in place now, or the estimations for what will be in place for Watson going forward, is each time they do this, they add a void year. Now, why do they add a void year? Well, because they can amortize the prorated bonus over an additional year. So rather than, for instance, if they never added any void years on this, then the first time they did a restructure, they would only be able to divide that restructure by 4 years. So a little bit higher amount would get placed on the cap for that current year, because you still get the prorated bonus amount. I may have misspoken slightly before. You still get the prorated bonus amount. So you still get, like, if, for instance, if you're getting if you're doing it over 5 years for Watson right now, it's about $9 million. So that $9 million still gets added to the base salary and everything else, along with the existing prorated bonuses. So you're only doing that over 4 years. And if you would have done it this year without ever adding any void years, there's only 3 years remaining on the contract. So you would have had it divided by 3. So instead, they're adding a void year each time to get to the maximum 5 years that they can amortize this thing over, which lowers the cap hit as much as possible in the current year, and then adds it and continues to add it onto the future, these future void years. And presumably, if they do it again next year, they'll add another void year. So there'll be 3 void years now, and they'll amortize it by the complete 5-year window. So by doing all this, you might think, okay, this is a way for the Browns to, free up needed space for this season. But the reality is now they have something like $63 million in cap that's left. So they already had available cap. With this, they're going to have even more available cap. They're adding that 40-something million that's being freed up. Actually, it's not 40-something. I guess you have to subtract the 9 million. They're adding that 30-something million to what's been freed up. And that's now all available to them for cap spending they could make this year. I mean, maybe there'll be a Brandon Ayuk signing. Maybe there'll be something else. But, they don't have to spend it. They can roll it over to the next year. So they didn't technically at this moment have to make this transaction. But what happens is the way the cap works, and this is the main point of what I want to talk about because it's not specific to the Browns here. The way the cap works, there is a benefit in it of itself to rolling cap hits into the future. Now, the ideal way that you do this is the player that you're restructuring fits a few different parameters. Okay. Ideally, it's a player who has a very, very big contract. Okay. Deshaun Watson checks that box. It's a player who you do not believe will suffer sudden injury or retirement risk. More the injury risk, though, because if they're near retirement and it's a quarterback, let's face it, you're rebuilding anyway. So it's not that big of a deal if you take a big cap hit. But you don't want catastrophic injury risk, catastrophic decline, or they're just not good anymore type of risk, because those will accelerate when you're going to be taking these cap hits, right? If someone gets injured, they have to retire, you're going to have to accelerate all those cap hits forward, and boom, it's going to blow up. So it's more dangerous if you're not doing it for a quarterback, basically. A big contract on another player, because you never know what's going to happen with these guys. I mean, an example in the past of when this has been done, not out of, I don't think, any brilliance or understanding the what I call the alchemy you can do here. You can kind of make cap out of nowhere by doing this, is when the Saints had done it in the past. With Drew Brees, I think it was just they wanted to push all in over and over and over again. And of course, this does allow you to do that, but it's not, there is other benefits to it, again, that I'll get to, that I think is a little bit more difficult to grasp, that you can do with it. Now, the problem in this situation is Deshaun Watson, like, he's not Drew Brees. He's not playing like a Hall of Fame quarterback. If your idea was, well, we'll just continue to restructure this thing and add an additional $9 million-ish to what we're paying him in a cap hit every year going forward, and then we'll have this lump sum at the end when he retires, and we'll take a massive cap hit and just write off that year for what we're going to be able to do, with limitations of what you can do under the CBA. if that was your idea, well, Deshaun Watson's got to start playing a little bit better. Because if you're paying him 20-something million this year, and then if you restructure again, you're paying him 30-something million next year, and if you restructure it again, and you're paying him 40-something million the year after that, I mean, is Deshaun Watson worth 40-something million dollars the way he's been playing? No. And then you also run the risk, and this is the big thing here. This is when like theory comes up against practice. Theoretical comes up against the practical. Theoretical, you restructure Deshaun Watson, you move the cap hit into the future. You take that money, you put it in a lockbox. For those old enough, that was the Al Gore versus George W. Bush campaign when he talked about, I think it was Social Security he was talking about. So you put it in the lockbox. And then you use that money, you roll it forward, and you use that money eventually in the future to pay off your dead cap hit in the future. And you could take advantage of some of this financial alchemy that I'm going to describe in a bit. Now, that's the theory, right? As part of that theory, you have a front office who is optimizing things and doing things the correct way. Perhaps Andrew Berry is that guy to do that the correct way. But the reality, the practical, let's get to the practical side of things, not the theoretical side. Let's get to the practical side. You got to win some ball games. And if Deshaun Watson isn't playing that well, are you not going to want to use that money to sign some more players? So you're going to be paying Deshaun Watson 20-something million this year, and you're like, you know what? Let's go get Brandon Ayuk, and let's pay him a bunch of money. Let's go and let's use this. Not only this year, we'll pay him on the new contract. Well, it's probably a small amount in year one, but even more in year two and year three. We'll use that money that we locked up. We'll restructure Deshaun Watson again to help pay for Ayuk and maybe bring in some more talent, and we'll just continue to do that. But in a way, you're now investing more and more money into a poor ROI situation. In other words, the return that you're getting on the Deshaun Watson contract, because he's not playing well enough. And again, that's like the major thing we need to think about in some of these situations. You can only do so much. If a quarterback is really good, it gives you so much flexibility for what you can do, and you can really take advantage of these sorts of moves that I'm talking about. And if they're not playing well, it doesn't really matter if you're doing these things. You're just kind of throwing good money after bad potentially. You're getting yourself up to the level of a playoff team instead of a non-playoff team, and not really getting yourself to the level of a Super Bowl team. And the biggest risk when we're talking about Deshaun Watson, the way he's playing, is now, after this restructure, you're staring down the barrel of a $73 million cap hit over the next 2 years on this contract, plus an additional $28 million in dead money when the contract is over. Might you be tempted to just extend beyond restructure now? Restructure is just moving the money around. We're just like shifting all the money around. We're doing magic tricks here, moving all the money around in the NFL. What happens if we have to extend Deshaun Watson because we're running up against financial limits that make it difficult to operate in the short term, and we care a lot about our jobs in the short term? We care a lot about this team that we've built to compete, what they're able to do over the next couple of years in the short term. Then you start having to throw more guaranteed money, likely, because Watson's coming from a position of strength when it comes to negotiating his contract. Even if he's not playing well, he's coming from a position of strength negotiating that contract. More guaranteed money at him, a longer contract, tying yourself to this quarterback even longer, right? That becomes a risk, because otherwise, the way out of this situation, if Deshaun Watson doesn't turn things around, now, if he plays well this year, maybe it's all a moot point and he ends up returning back to his very, very high level of play that we saw over multiple seasons in Houston. Then you're like, we're on good trajectory here, and we can do an extension and figure things out. But if he doesn't, then you're either extending a player and paying them way too much money that isn't going to be that good, or you're paying them or you're paying him way too much money over the next 2 years by a cap hit and taking a third cap hit when you let him go for the void year. And the only thing you can do to mitigate that cost is maybe trade up in the draft to go get a quarterback and hope that quarterback hits. And now you have a quarterback on a rookie contract, which will help mitigate some of the massive cost that's still left on this Deshaun Watson contract. We still have, 160 million or something like that left of cost on this Deshaun Watson contract in terms of cap. That's going to have to come off the cap at some point in time. So the alchemy is there, but this has to come off of the cap at some point in time. Now, the first time I thought about writing up this strategic shift and this alchemy that's going on with these contracts is with the Jalen Hurts contract. And if those of you who have looked at the Jalen Hurts contract, it has multiple bonuses which kick into the future, which will then be amortized over longer periods of time. So it's like spreading all of this amortization of bonuses over a very long period of time, kicking the can into the future, but also tying themselves to him for a long time. So again, if you have Patrick Mahomes, I wouldn't mind doing this stuff with Patrick Mahomes. If you had Josh Allen, I wouldn't mind doing this stuff with Josh Allen. If you have Joe Burrow, I don't know. I might mind doing a little bit with Joe Burrow. Who else could we put in this category? Lamar Jackson. I mean, maybe. I'd be a little bit concerned with Lamar Jackson because at least my research has shown that rushing quarterbacks are pretty good through their second contract. Could have some problems on their third contract, but it's really maybe just like a two-dude sort of thing at this point that I'd be confident enough in. And I have a high bar for having confidence that someone's going to be great for a long period of time. I mean, I wrote the positive Jalen Hurts piece when he was drafted, or the positive pick, saying that was a good pick because I said, we don't know who Carson Wentz is at this point, despite the fact that we gave him a second contract. Like, we don't know who guys are is a big part of my philosophy. For those two, though, for Mahomes, for Allen, I would be okay with that. But you're taking on this extra risk. So the Eagles decided to take on this extra risk with Jalen Hurts and building in this financial alchemy. So I'm going to run through an example here. It's better if you're watching on YouTube. So if you guys are podcasting, come to YouTube, but I think you can follow it on the podcast anyway. I'm going to run through an example here just to show you how by spending the same exact amount of cap dollars over a period of time, how you shift around the money, mostly shifting it, front, how you shift the cap spending to the front, how you can actually spend a greater percentage of the cap over time. And that's what we're talking about. Like, that's the allocation, right? That's the resource that you have. That's what we base everything on. Draft picks are valuable because their cap hits are low. Now, for a quarterback, maybe the one exception, like you're just being able to access that talent is impossible to do otherwise. But for the most part, that's how we value it. Free agents, they're valuable in relation to their contract straight up because there's no draft picks involved. And then when draft picks are involved, when we're talking about trades or we're talking about drafting players, it's mostly because they're providing a value over their cap charge on those cheap rookie contracts. So the cap is like is really what we're trying to juice. We're trying to maximize that sort of thing. So how are these teams maximizing it? And again, this would theoretically work better if it's not Deshaun Watson, if it's not Jalen Hurts also. No offense to Jalen Hurts, but haven't quite seen enough to put him in the Mahomes and Allen category. But if you had someone else, how are they able to do this financial alchemy? I think we're going to see more of this, more different teams doing it. Teams like the Chiefs and the Bills, call me if you want me to walk you through these things for how you could potentially be doing this stuff too. Just because if you have the right front office in place, and a lot of people might not have the right front office in place, but if you have the right front office in place, you could at least gain some stuff on the margins for how we're doing it. Okay, so let's think about how this works, and I'm going to bring up my little spreadsheet here for you guys to look at. Maybe I can get rid of this thing so you don't have to see this. Oh, there we go. Pop that up a little bit, and so basically, it's just looking at a pretty simplistic 5-year scenario for cap spending. And the amounts that I'm putting up here is really kind of looking at how much like cap value you're putting into certain years. It's not like the actual cap, because again, you have to like adhere by the cap, right? You can roll forward some cap money that you can spend later, things like that. But like when Deshaun Watson's contract is being restructured here, you could say theoretically they're getting 40 something, well, minus the 9. Okay. So they're getting 30 something million dollars of cap value, of player cap value this season than they would have otherwise. If they could go and spend that 30 something million on someone else, right? Like if they spent it and they got a free agent for 30 something million, okay, boom, this year you're getting that cap spending. Now you're not actually spending more cap. You've kicked the cap into the future, but you're getting that cap value. So that's how I'm going to kind of really look at the cap in this situation is looking at how you're getting, how much cap value you're getting in a particular year, player value you're getting in a particular year. So the scenarios that I put together as part of this is I just said, okay, let's just make this a simple example. Let's say you have a $100 million cap this season. We're all starting the NFL from scratch. You have a $100 million cap this season. And what happens is you have the traditional way, which is you take $100 million, you don't restructure anything, you have a $100 million cap hit this year. It goes up by 5%. So it goes up to 105. You spend 105. It goes up another 5%. It goes up to 110. You spend 110. It goes up another 5%. And because of compounding, it goes up 6 million now. If you round it off, I didn't want to extend out like all the, 116 million, 999. I didn't want to do all that. So I'm just rounding on this. So you spend 116 million, and then it goes up to 122 million in the 5th year. As it continues to go up as a compounding rate of 5%, and you spend 122 million. So over this entire period of time, the like player value you've gotten in terms of the cap is you got 100% every year. You spent it all, you got that value. At the end, you ended up getting 500% player value, 500% of the cap, so 100% per year. Pretty simple stuff, right? Now, if you start looking into like, how could we maybe do things differently in a simple 5-year example? Okay, well, let's say we, through various means, get player value that's 10 million over the cap in year 1. So let's say a very simple way is we have a roster, we're ready to go, the season's about to start, and I decide, you know what, I'm going to take one of these contracts for a player who has a big contract. I'm going to restructure it in a way that creates $10 million in cap space this year. I'm going to spend that $10 million of cap space on a player for this year. And then I'm going to amortize that in the future. And eventually I'll pay it off. I'll pay it off, the amount that I'm kind of borrowing from the future, right? So let's say you do that. Say you do that in year 1, you say, you know what, things are going pretty well. And in year 2, I'm gonna take out the credit card again. I'm gonna borrow another 10 million in year 2 because things are going well. So I spent 100. I got like player spending, how much they're kind of worth of 10 million over the cap, over what would be theoretically there with the cap if I didn't do any of that, and 10 million in the 2nd year. And then I say, you know what, things are going pretty well. Let's do it again. Let's take another 10 million in the 3rd year here. So each year I'm taking this, I'm getting more player value out of this money, and I'm just kicking these cap charges into the future. So I'm complying with the cap. There's no problem complying with the cap, but it's basically leaving more cap charges in the future where I'm not getting any more player value, right? It's the same player on these contracts. I'm not getting, it's tied to the contract. It's tied to the player. I'm not getting any additional player value. Okay, things don't go so well. Well, let's say things did go well. I won the Super Bowl. Let's do the positive side here. So I won the Super Bowl, and I said, you know what? We're going to do a little bit of retooling, resetting, restructuring, whatever you want to say, for the next 2 years in this 5-year hypothetical scenario. And I say, well, I got 30 million on the credit card here. So, I'm going to plan my roster. So I'm kind of not really bringing in the full cap amount of talent here. I'm going about 15 million under the cap talent in the 4th year. And then I'm going 15 million under the cap talent in the 5th year. So overall, if you net it all out, if you spent 30 million too much in those first few years, and then you kind of took a little bit of your medicine and you decided, you know what, I'm not going to kick the can any longer. I'm going to take my medicine these next 2 years. I'm going to be under in player value cap spending by 15 million a year. You end up net zero at the end. So now you're starting at this point after 5 years, the same way you would have started if you just signed every person to a contract, which was the amount was divided by the number of years that they were going to be there, and you're assuming you're going to get that much player value for them each year. Now, what's interesting is, though, if you look at the player value that you're getting in cap percentage in the first year, if you say I'm getting 110 million in player value on a $100 million cap, that's 110%. And it's roughly the same thing in the second year. It's a little bit less because the cap's gone up. So 10%, 10 million over of a $105 million cap. It's a little bit less. It gets a little bit less going forward. But the way it works, because the cap is going up every year, it's kind of like a time value of money type of situation. Because the cap is going up every year, getting that player value today and then having to pay off, so borrowing that player value dollar today and then having to pay off that player value dollar in the future means you got more player value overall. If you take the total cap percentage now that you got in player value over those 5 years, instead of it being 500%, which it is if you're spending the same amount every year, now it's 503%. Now, it's a tiny amount. It's not like the most amount. But hey, guess what? You're getting a little bit of extra cap value, right? You're spending an extra dollar today when wide receivers cost, I don't know what they cost now, $30 million a year, let's say. You're spending an extra dollar today when wide receivers cost $30 million a year. And then you're paying off that dollar a few years down the road, let's say 5 years down the road, where wide receivers are going to cost $50 million a year. Hey, I'd rather have that, like that value is worth more on that for what they cost today than that value is going to be worth in the future. So you just created out of thin air just by shifting around the spending 3% more player value over that 5-year window, simply by taking the cap charges up front. Now, you don't want to layer on bad decisions on top of that. Again, I talked about that before. That's the key. You don't layer on bad decisions on top of it. But if you can simply work under this paradigm, you can see a dollar today is worth more than a dollar in the future in terms of player value. So you want to spend it today. Now let's roll out even a more extreme example of how this could potentially work, because I think this is when things start to get interesting. Let's roll out an example, and I wrote up an example here where I said, okay, let's look at how long of a window did I do here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay, let's look at a window of 14 years. Again, the cap goes up 5% a year, and the assumption is within this structure, we're going to have a 5-year window to start where we want to push our chips in. So again, like you're creating financial alchemy no matter what in this circumstance. But you can also use it to allocate money in the years where you think you're going to be better too. So you may be getting a little bit more leverage when it comes to Super Bowl probability, let's say. So anyway, so we have a 5-year window where we spend a lot more. We have a 2-year window where we take our medicine. We have a 5-year window where we bring in more player talent than what we should be able to do technically underneath the cap. And then we have a 2-year window where we take our medicine again. So if you start doing that over and over and over again, as you look at this, and I'm saying we take 25 million extra I mean, sorry, 20 million extra, but we could even take more. Actually, let me raise this up because I want to juice it as much as possible. So let's raise it up to there. Um, and let's say we're doing 25 million extra than what we would have what we would have done under this scenario. So 25 million extra for 5 years, and then we take our medicine after that. We take a $70 million medicine in the first year after that, and a $55 million medicine after that. Well, if you look at all this alchemy and how it's working, and again, taking these hits up front and then taking the medicine later, hits up front. I mean, hits, I shouldn't say. Bringing in the player talent up front and then paying for it later. When you're doing those sorts of things, you're taking the hits later, I guess. At the end of 14 years, you end up spending what would the equivalent of 1,430% of the cap when we're talking about player value that you've gotten. So you got an extra 30% of the cap over this window, 30% better player talent for one season, right? Not overall 30%, but a season's worth of 30% talent on the roster you were able to generate just by doing this. Plus, you could be and should be allocating more money in the years that you have the championship window, which allows you to get additional leverage on your Super Bowl odds. But even if you were randomly saying, we're going to bring in more talent this year and restructure some contracts to send the cost down the road, even if you're doing that on a random basis, the more you're doing it, the more you're getting in terms of total player talent over the life of the contract, because you're getting the player talent today with a dollar that you can kick into the future when the cap's going up 5% a year. Because, for instance, the cap, I mean, these are significant amounts when we talk about compounding amounts on the cap. If you start at $100 million, 14 years into the future, according to this example, the cap is up to almost $190 million. It hasn't quite doubled, but it's close to doubling. So that $1 that you're spending in year one versus the dollar you're spending in year 14, the dollar that you're finally having to not spend in year 14, let's say, on a player, in cap terms, in talent terms, it's probably only worth 60% of the money that you were spending at the beginning. Now, you don't want to just do this for the sake of doing it, but this is the alchemy. And I think this is maybe where the Browns are going by doing this and allowing a bunch of money to be rolled over and continue to roll over in the future to kind of have this nest egg to eventually have a chance to have this nest egg of cap that they can eventually use with the dead money. That will work. But even beyond that, it might be like bringing the talent now. And again, so the risks are significant, but all else being equal, more and more teams, if they have the money to do so. And I think this is also where we're going to talk about the difference between owners that have a lot of money versus owners that don't have a lot of money, because each one of these restructures requires the owner to give a bonus up front rather than salary in the future. So this is costing ownership real dollars to implement a strategy that is gaining them theoretical player value dollars. Ownership that is willing to do that is going to, on a continual basis, because you can keep flipping this, you can keep just flipping this over and over and over again on a continual basis and resetting and then flipping again and then resetting on a continual basis, we'll be able to have a more talented team overall. It's marginal, but if you do this correctly, you could theoretically get a team that is 2, 3, 4, 5% better by doing nothing but allocating the cap hits into the right years and bringing in the player talent in the right years and being willing to give more money up front in additional bonuses to the players, which you then amortize out into the future. Okay, so that's it. That's the presentation. That's what I wanted to get to get forward for on what's happening here. We're going to see anything with Deshaun Watson. We've seen it with Jalen Hurts. Maybe we'll see it with some others in the future. All right, if you guys enjoyed this, let me know. I may do some more of these again as we're going forward to get an idea of like different topical things that are going on, how I'm working through it in my mind, how I'm thinking about all these things, but I'm not necessarily putting it down on paper or on audio. Now I'm doing that. Put it out on audio, put it out on the YouTube and the X platform. Go ahead, subscribe, unexpectedpoints.substack.com. Not only will you get the premium pods here, you'll get all the other work that I'm coming up with for the season. Of course, when the season comes, it's pretty much a daily piece that I'm putting out. I mean, maybe not always on the weekends, but there are multiple pieces for the for the Sunday game windows and things. So, almost 7 pieces a week, I would say, will be coming out from Unexpected Points during the regular season. I appreciate all the support from everyone out there. And unless something pops up tomorrow, I'll be talking at you guys on Tuesday again, hopefully with Josh Hernsmeyer. Thanks so much. Talk to you later.